Hey guys, welcome into Legacy. Uh, with this video here today, guys, I'm going to talk a little bit about die types, die systems, and kind of what I like about them, what I think works with certain systems, certain subsystems, um, and why I think each of the die types work. And then I'm going to kind of close this out with talking a bit about what my favorite type of systems are, um, to give you a better idea for understanding what I enjoy doing. Like all videos, this is just my opinion. Take leave. Standard bog standard boilerplate that's there in the description. Okay. So that being said, guys, what kind of die systems are out there? So when we talk about die systems, I'm not just talking about do you use D6s or D10s or D12s or D20s. About actual systems that function around those. Do you do a bog standard D20 plus modifiers versus difficulty? Do you do die pull versus difficulty? Do you do die pull? Pull pick the highest. Uh, do you do something like alternity, which is situation or control die plus situation die? Those are all systems, die systems, and die types. Um, but before we jump into those, I do want to talk about the individual die types and what I like my favorite die type is. So when you're thinking about die types, it's important to think about bell curves and think about how they roll and how they impact the game based on how often failure and success can be achieved and all that. So that being said, my favorite die types for a game are both D6 and D20, depending on the system, depending on the setting. Um, D6s have the um, widest bell curve, especially in die pull systems such as Shadowrun, Star Wars D6, Goblin Slayer, uh, Hero. All those systems, they have the broadest bell curve. Um, uh, but and I do like that about them. The D20 I like because I think it's the flattest bell curve available for you. Um, it is a little easier to calculate numerically on the fly if you're thinking about success, failure, chance on the fly, because it's a flat 5%. Uh, that being said, D20 systems tend to use a lot more modifiers than most D6 systems do. D6 systems tend to use uh, a lot of flat, just D6 add together. So what you wind up with these six systems is you wind up with an average roll of 3.5 across multiple dice. So an average die pull being say 4, you're going to wind up with around a 14 score, somewhere in that range. Whereas a D20 with the flat 5% plus modifiers, uh, you average about 10 on a D20. You should average 10 to 11 on a D20 plus modifiers. And if the average modifier in a game is say 8 to 10, you're going to wind up between a 20 and or an 18 and a 20 on the total. General rules, of course, but so that's why I prefer those two die types. I know there's a lot of love for D10s in role playing. Again, very flat curve, very easy to use, very easy to calculate. Um, the pass failure, easy to adjust to modifiers. Generally, D10 systems that I've played don't do modifiers in +1, +2 category. They're generally in groups of 5s um, because it just keeps the bell curve simpler. Um, all that being said, guys, so when it comes to using these dice and systems, my system of choice is a regressive roll under system. Um, because roll under systems give the same percentage generally as roll over systems without as much math as a general rule. So take champions, for example, it's a 3d6 roll under system, but the numbers that you get tend to be a little bit on the a little bit higher end, moderate higher end. So you're talking 13 to 18, which is about the same as you're going to get with a D20 roll over system with, say, a +5 or a +7 modifier. Numerically, that's just about the same mathematics. Um, But regressive systems to me have always made more sense because of the fact that you tend to roll average. That's just a general rule. You tend to roll close to average. Um, and exceptional rules are exceptional rules for a reason. So, rolling a 3 in champions is very difficult to do, whereas rolling a 20 in D20 is a 5% chance. So, you know, and you see it a lot. Uh, it just, like I said, to me, just makes more sense. It's more common sense to me. Um, it also gives more room to me for growth. Uh, because the higher your score is, the more chance you should have to succeed, independent of the dice. Um, when you look at things like D&D, you look at games like Pathfinder, you look at any game that uses a scaling difficulty class system like that, as the character becomes more proficient, generally speaking, especially in pre-written modules, you'll see the difficulty numbers climb with them. Therefore, they tried to keep the bell curve in the middle, but not by adjusting for proficiency. They really have to change what the averages are in order to do that, because they realize that by like level 10 in D&D, you're going to have like plus 10, 12, maybe even plus 15 in the skill. So a 15 on a rolling a 15 difficulty class in 5th edition is very easy for a mid-level character versus a game like Champions, like Alternity, uh, even some games like Call of Cthulhu, rolling under is a little more difficult because the progression also is a little different. Skill progression in those games doesn't always, but tends to float a little slower than progression in games that are roll over. Um, that's my personal choice. I like that about them. So when I'm looking at die types, but what does work, what doesn't work with these die systems is kind of tricky. Like I said, a lot of it comes down to mathematics. So I know there's been a little push, not a huge one, for kind of off the wall die types in a game. Particular D8 and D12 have seen a little more use recently. Um, I'm not a big fan of that. I don't like those dice as a primary mechanical resolution die because of the fact that they can cause very wonky bell curves. It doesn't mean they don't work. They just cause a lot of weird mathematics. Um, and it also creates a lot of headaches on the design side, trying to get the bell curve to stay in the middle, which is the idea behind skill systems and combat systems, is that you should have about the same chance to hit at all levels. Unless you're fighting something that's kind of low level. If you're fighting something on your level, something that is at your power level, you should have the same chance to always hit or succeed against them. And with die types like D8s or D4s, you tend to get a little less chance to do that because the mathematics gets a little bit wonkier. Your percentages are a lot different. Your modifiers have to be a lot different. Things like that. One of the ways around that is to put the D8 or D12 into what's called a die step system, a la Earth Dawn or Savage Worlds, where you're stepping the die up and down to adjust the bell curve based on difficulty. So a very experienced character in, say, uh, Savage Worlds may have a D8 or a D10, whereas somebody who has very limited knowledge may have a D4. And of course, if you've ever played that game, the difficulty is default 4 on the highest die. So the higher the die, the more probability you have of succeeding at a task. So what they really kind of have done with that system is flatten the bell curve by allowing you to grow your die types versus systems that use static dice. But that doesn't make it bad. So, like I said, there's a lot of good things and bad things with every die type and every die system out there. Even die pulse systems have their own problems. Take Old World of Darkness. Old World of Darkness was prone, especially at higher level play, where you could see botches more often, because the more dice you roll, the more probability became that you could roll more ones than successes, uh, which is counterintuitive because the more skilled you are, the less chance you should have to botch a roll. That's a common thing that gets talked about. A lot of people house roll that away. Um, I personally don't, but a lot of people have house rolled that away. When you look at it, if you look at different die systems and different die types, you really look at them realistically, you see the unique issues with them. Like I said, if you're looking at different die systems, um, you see the flaws in them as you play them. You'll run across them. Um, you know, even supposedly skilled characters in a die poll system can be terrible at things because the die type they use has a very difficult mathematical curve. Um, so even basic tasks can be difficult for somebody who is even remotely skilled. And generally speaking, the higher the die type, the more likely that becomes. Because while you do the mathematics based on averages um, and probability goes out the window the moment you start sending dice. I think everyone's ever played the game knows that. So you have to be careful with that. But as far as that goes, guys, there's a lot of really good die systems out there. There are a lot of really good, uh, game systems out there that use various die types. And at the end of the day, it comes down to how much you approve of your ability to do the task at hand when you're playing. Um, but like I said, my two favorite types are D20s and D6s. I think they have the best curves. I think they generally produce the most average results out of all the dice I've ever rolled. Um, some of it has to do with physics, some of it has to do with layer roll, yada yada. But I've seen a lot of other die types that don't necessarily cooperate very well with me when it comes to rolling. But just know, when you're looking at die systems, you're looking at die types, and you're trying to figure, what's the best die type, to play with. What one do I prefer to use? Um, you know, honestly, look at it realistically. What gives the game the flavor, especially in games that use multiple die types. There is a reason most games use one die type for resolution, though. So that being said, guys, I'd love to hear what you have to say about the die systems, die types. Do you prefer progressive or regressive rolling systems? Do you prefer a particular type of dice over another? Do you prefer die pulls over step systems? That kind of stuff. As always, though, follow the 3 rules: no ad hominems, no picking fights, no college dissertations. Other than that, guys, we do hope you have fun.